what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, November 17th, 2017. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. It's also the peak of the Leonids meteor shower for those of you who are out before sunrise in the morning. See some of those shooting stars overhead. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today, so let's get right on into the news. Now, back when Donald Trump was talking about the possibility that our elections might be tampered with or rigged, and everybody's saying, oh, it could never happen. Obama was saying it's too complex, couldn't possibly happen, and Hillary Clinton was out there saying, oh, it's a horrifying idea. Then, of course, Hillary lost, and immediately it changed around. Oh, of course the election was rigged. Russia rigged it. And apparently Hillary Clinton is now back out there claiming that Russia stole the election from her and gave it to Donald Trump. And again, pushing this story with absolutely zero evidence about it. And she's upping the ante, saying that there's no question that Russia changed the outcome of the general election last year for the presidency. And so they're back to pushing this nonsense. And for somebody who claimed that she wasn't planning on ever running for office again, she certainly sounds like she still wants that Oval Office by hook or by crook. Now, getting on to the issue of Judge Roy Moore, he's starting to go on the offensive. He's taking the initiative, and he's out there saying that all of this smear job is an effort by Mitch McConnell to steal the election, because apparently McConnell was backing another GOP candidate in the Alabama Senate race that Judge Roy Moore defeated, and Mitch is apparently very unhappy. The concern appears to be that Judge Roy Moore, being kind of an independent outsider, he might cast swing votes and offset John McCain, who's supposed to be a Republican but tends to side with the Democrats more and more these days. Now, Roy Moore's lawyer is out there saying it is pretty obvious at this point that the yearbook inscription is forged. And basically, the issue that they have raised is the fact that after the Roy Moore in the yearbook, there are the letters D.A. which was explained to us as meaning district attorney. And he wasn't a district attorney at the time. He was an assistant district attorney at the time. But it turns out it's got nothing to do with his job, because when he was on the bench and he would be writing out legal orders, his assistant would be required to initial after the name so that they knew who processed it. And Judge Moore's assistant in this divorce case that involved Ms. Nelson was Delbert Adams, hence the D.A. So it is very obvious that that inscription in the yearbook was copied from some of the legal papers from Ms. Nelson's divorce action. Now remember, initially she said that after Moore harassed her, that she never met him again, but that's not true. He was the presiding judge in Nelson's divorce action, which she lost, by the way. She didn't get what she wanted, so this is her little bit of payback. And again, we posted the photo of the actual inscription in the yearbook, and if you look very carefully, it's obvious that starting with the word Moore, it's a different colored ink. So somebody found an inscription in the yearbook that was simply signed Roy, that sounded very romantic and flirtatious, and then they added the rest after it. Now, as you know, Gloria Allred has been asked repeatedly whether the inscription is authentic or not, and she won't answer one way or the other, which is telling you an awful lot right there. And now it's gotten even worse, because yesterday on MSNBC's MTP Daily, basically she was asked, did Nelson actually see Roy Moore sign the yearbook? And Allred said, I didn't ask. She didn't even ask her client if the client had seen Roy Moore sign the yearbook. So at this point, that whole inscription, that yearbook inscription, is down in flames. And again, if you have got real evidence of wrongdoing, if there was real evidence out there of Judge Roy Moore sexually assaulting and harassing underage girls 30 years ago, then you don't dare engage in a fraud, because if the fraud is discovered, as has been in this case, it discredits all the other claims And so once you detect a fraud, you know it's all fraud. Now, John McCain is still out there, even though the Senate is split almost 50-50, Democrat and GOP. He's still out there on the warpath against Judge Roy Moore, even though he knows that will give Alabama's Senate seat to a Democrat and narrow that gap to a single vote in the Senate. It's moving the Democrats one step closer to having the votes to impeach Donald Trump. And so basically McCain is double-crossing Trump. Maybe he's a sore loser because he's tried for the presidency twice and didn't get there. They all want him gone. They all want him gone because he's not part of the clique. He's not part of the club. He's not part of the narcocracy. He can't be trusted to keep cover-ups on things that need to be covered up here. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And I really... on one hand, I don't like the fact of all these sexual allegations coming on out because it is distracting from Uranium Gate, Dossier Gate, Primary Gate, and we're being conditized. But on the other hand, there's a curtain being pulled back on Washington, D.C. and what kind of people are in our government, and I think that's a good thing for the American people to see. And this may turn out to be the year of the grand disillusionment. Disillusionment in Hollywood celebrities, disillusionment in our politicians, and really come to understand these are some very scummy people for the most part. There are a few rare exceptions, like Cynthia McKinney, Ron Paul, so forth. But if you look at the number of sexual harassment claims that have been settled out of court in the Congress, and they actually posted the numbers. I think the worst year was 2006. They had something like 24. That's one every 2 weeks. They spent huge amounts of your tax money, not the Congress critters' tax money, or the Congress critters' money. The Congress critters were not required to pay the settlements to these people that they harassed. It came out of your pocket here. Now, interestingly enough, it's fun, sort of, kind of watching the difference in treatment between Judge Roy Moore, for whom there's actually no evidence supporting any of these allegations, and Al Franken, where there are photos and videos of him groping and grabbing women all over the place. And yet, CNN and NBC, they're defending Al Franken. Oh, it was nothing. He's being a comedian. It's no big deal. So, again, we're seeing that the corporate media establishment is still very liberal. They're out there to protect Democrats and liberals. They're out there to attack conservatives and Republicans. Now, Politico is out there saying that Al Franken's rush to have a hearing before the Senate Ethics Committee is a sham. It's a fraud, because the Senate Ethics Committee is a place where ethics complaints about senators go to die. And they'll say, yes, we've had a hearing, and, well, we didn't really find anything. It's the whitewash. It's where they bury these things and make them go away. So let's get away from all the sexual dalliances here, if you will, and get on back to the important scandals. And we're seeing more and more hue and cry, even within some parts of the corporate media, saying it is time to have investigations into these various scandals, such as Uranium One. Even the New York Post is out there saying the Justice Department has a duty to consider a probe of the Uranium One sale. Actually, not even consider it. There's enough evidence there to move forward with a full-blown investigation and prosecutions. Because the FBI knew there was bribery and coercion going on, and Hillary and her associates still signed off on the deal, including some people who are now working in Robert Mueller's office, trying to go after Donald Trump. There's an infinite amount more evidence regarding the Uranium Gate, Russia Gate, Dossier Gate, Primary Gate, than there is about Russian-Trump collusion. And we're starting to see more and more GOP members of Congress saying that Sessions either investigate, a full, legitimate, open investigation, or he should step down, and we need an attorney general who will actually do the job. And I still think Larry Klayman would be perfect for the job. Now, Hillary is obviously very worried about the Uranium One investigation. She's out there saying it's an abuse of power. And one of the most ridiculous claims that came on out from the liberals is that traditionally you don't go after the losers of a campaign with criminal prosecutions. And that's absolutely nonsense. under the United States and our system, if you break the law, you're supposed to be investigated, charged, tried, and if convicted, you go to jail. There's no get-out-of-jail-free card for you just because you're a loser, Hillary. Now, the author of the Clinton Cash book, which really cranked up a lot of this public awareness about just how corrupt the Clintons are, basically says that there are tapes existing of Hillary Clinton dealing with Russia, and he says they're damning. There's evidence out there. It's starting to surface. Now, the other day, we were talking about how the secret informant that the FBI had inside the uranium deal had been named in an interview with Reuters. And basically, his name is William D. Campbell. And I kind of wondered at the time why, knowing the long history of dead bodies behind the Clintons, that he would do an interview with Reuters and go public with his name. As it turns out, it actually didn't work that way. Apparently, Reuters got the name from Jeff Sessions' Department of Justice. They leaked his name just a week before testifying against the Clinton crime family in the Uranium One hearings. And Sessions may have just gotten this man suicided. So I understand that he is in fear for his life and he needs to be taking precautions, because people who have incriminating information on the Clintons have a bad habit of dying in small plane wrecks, or in the case of Ron Brown, big plane wrecks, or winding up dead in Fort Marcy Park, being suicided, shot multiple times. Now, this FBI informant is saying that he's got videos of briefcases full of money that were being handed back and forth to facilitate the deal. And I hope he has them in a secure place, and I hope he has multiple copies of them. Because you know the Clintons' henchmen are out there hunting for this guy and his evidence, and they're loaded for bear. I wouldn't want to be carrying the life insurance on this guy right now. Meanwhile, over at Judicial Watch, they have released 109 pages of new Hillary Clinton emails from her tenure as Secretary of State, some of which are classified. Remember, there wasn't supposed to be any classified information on her email server, and everything was supposed to have been turned over to congressional investigators a long time ago, and oh, gee whiz, we forgot about that. And these documents include comments about supporting the Libyan rebels and Hamas PLO talks. But again, Hillary just was not playing by the rules. Now, again, former FBI Director James Comey tried to excuse it, saying she didn't mean to do wrong. But again, if you read Title 18, intent is not required. But they're all trying to protect her and cover up for her. Remember when she did that interview on Mother Jones, and she said, if I'm charged, terrible things will happen. She's in a position to literally blackmail the entire deep state over their links to gun running, drug running, CIA, and all the rest of it. The Clintons know where all the dead bodies are buried and how they got to be dead bodies. And Hillary, we have seen indications before that she sent out the message. If she goes down, she's going to take everybody else with her, which might be a good thing, because this government is headed toward a Soviet Union-style collapse. Now, as you know, New Jersey Senator Menendez is celebrating the fact that he's off the hook. He had a mistrial, and so far no word of a retry. And he's out there saying this was all wrong. And now he's saying that the only reason the FBI investigated him was because he's Latino. And he's out there playing the race card. I didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't corrupt. They just went after me because I'm a Latino. They're a bunch of racists over at the FBI. And talk about hypocrisy and comeuppance. Wes Goodman is a Republican state legislator for Ohio, and he routinely touts his Christian faith, and he has an anti-LGBT policy. All of that has come to an end. He's had to tender his resignation when he was caught having sex with a man in his office. So once again, we find out that what the politicians are saying is not necessarily what they're doing in their private lives. Okay, let's turn on over to the war zones, emphasis on the plural here. Once again, Russian bombers have hit targets of the Islamic State near Abu Kamal in Syria. And again, these are these long-range Tupolev 22 M3 bombers. They left an airbase in Russia, crossed Iran and Iraq, carried out a massive airstrike against facilities of Islamic State, ISIS, Daesh, ISIL, whatever they're calling themselves this week. And basically said that all the designated targets were hit. And I think they're rubbing that in response to Donald Trump's cruise missile attack against that Syrian base where most of the missiles didn't hit the target. Now, the Pentagon has announced it is staying in Syria even though ISIS is defeated. Now, the real agenda is still finding a way to get rid of Bashar al-Assad and installing a puppet regime there. But the Pentagon is saying that they have a right to stay in Syria because ISIS might come back. ISIS could come back, and we want to have our bases and everything ready to go. And, of course, Syria's not buying it. They're asking the United States to leave. In fact, they're demanding it, saying that the U.S. military presence on their soil without their permission represents a military aggression. And Russia is saying it is time for the U.S. to leave. They were never invited to be in there. But the Pentagon is saying, we're going to stay. What are you going to do? Declare war on the United States? Ha, 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 ha. Syrian diplomat calls on U.S. to stop backing culprits of chemical attacks. And they're basically talking about this back and forth over the U.S. trying to get an extension on the UN investigation into chemical weapons in Syria. And the latest report coming out basically blamed Damascus for the chemical attack, but it's now come on out. Investigators didn't even visit the site of the incident. There was no investigation. They were simply told, you're going to write a report saying that Syria was to blame for the chemical attacks on the Syrian people. And they said, yes, sir, and that's what they did. But again, the story just did not make any sense. To find out if you are being lied to, look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't there, what was never there, is a reason for Assad to gas his own people, knowing it would open the door to a U.S. invasion when he was already winning the war. ISIS is all but gone. Syria is back under the control of the Syrian government, except for the Golan. It didn't make any sense. The story never made any sense. But if you're a loyal American, you'll believe our lies, because our lies stand for mom and apple pie and cute little puppies, and all those other people's lies are all about evil. Apparently, the Syrian army liberated quarters of Deir ez-Zor from ISIS, and they found huge warehouses with huge number of lethal weapons. We're not just talking about a few weapons and chemical weapons left around some outpost. We're talking about M16 automatic rifles, TOW anti-tank missiles, 155 millimeter U.S.-made artillery. And there were even Hummers in there, some of which were already stuffed with bombs ready to explode. If you click the link on this, you'll see a photo of everything laid out. There was enough weapons there to equip a small army, and of course that's why they were going on in there. We're not looking at this idea of just a little bit of weapons smuggling somewhere. We're talking about a major operation to supply ISIS and Al-Qaeda by the U.S. government. And by the way, that's not news. Remember, that came all out in documents brought out by Judicial Watch and the various investigations. When Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, at the same time they were telling you ISIS and Al-Qaeda are terrorists, they were supporting them militarily. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And over in Raqqa, Syria, it is becoming very obvious that the U.S.-backed Kurdish YPG militia is not really concerned with fighting ISIS, but about capturing territory. There is still a plan to break off a part of Syria, if not Iraq, for an independent Kurdistan. So we'll see what's going to happen over there. Because at this point, from the point of view of Syria, the Kurdish militia are not allies, not when they're trying to basically cordon off chunks of the country. Now, Turkish President Erdogan has accused the U.S. of financial support to ISIS, along with all the weapons. And he went on to say the U.S. has disappointed us a lot. They said they were fighting ISIS, and what did they do? They gave ISIS a bunch of dollars. He went on to say Ankara does not want to cooperate with Washington about Africa because the United States has consistently violated the agreement. That is a real problem. The United States government is getting a reputation for just not keeping its word about anything. And that's going to make any efforts at diplomatic solutions for anything that much more difficult. Now, Israel is very nervous about this ceasefire deal in southern Syria signed last weekend between the U.S., Russia, and Jordan. And that's because, according to Israel, the deal will allow Iranian-backed forces to position themselves as close as 3.5 miles from the Israeli border in the Golan Heights. But I think what their concern is that they want to basically claim the Golan Heights for themselves permanently. They've already started selling off the oil and gas underneath it. So Israel's trying to figure out a way where they can just sort of grab it and somehow make it seem like it's the just and moral thing to do. Let's take some phone calls. Joe in Rhode Island. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Michael, I really appreciate your research, and you're well read, and I really appreciate your investigations. I'd like to ask you a favor, though.
What?
John Podesta, who was the Democratic man in charge during the elections, he was on WikiLeaks, a tape that they had, and it was to do with talking to two Democratic operatives about an organization. They wanted to start an organization to undermine the Christian churches, especially the Catholic Church and the evangelicals around the country.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to undermine them. And John Podesta said on the tape, he says, we already have 3 or 4 organizations doing that. I was wondering, Michael, could you find out the names of those organizations?
Well, I'll take a look.
I would really appreciate that.
I'll try and take a look at that, but from the Democrats' point of view, the Republican Party gets a lot of support from the Christian community, those who are not Christian Zionists, of course, and finding a way to disrupt the religion would undermine some of that support for the GOP.
I would love to know what organizations those are, because I'll tell you this, Mike. I'm a Christian. I'm 70 years old now,
mm-hmm.
and I've been a Christian all my life. And I've always wondered if there was government intervention in the churches in our country.
Well, yes. I
could never prove it. And here we have it on tape.
Well,
there is government intervention in the churches.
Well, the government uses the churches to keep people basically where they are, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and so forth and so on. But especially, remember Bush's faith-based initiatives, where along with their tax-free status, churches were getting huge chunks of tax money to carry out social programs that normally would have been handled by the civilian sector. And so, governments throughout history have relied on religion to help mold the opinion of the general public. In the age of TV and radio and newspapers, their influence isn't as great as it once was, but it's still a major force for propaganda. Anyway, Joe, we're going to have to let you go. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back.
See what you can do, Mike.
I'll do my best. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're going to go back to the phones here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Mike. Hey, Mike, what was the name of that airline bringing the CIA weapons from, what was it, Ramstein to, to Turkey? Or, no, Bulgaria. Remember that investigative reporter?
Oh, Evergreen, I think it was. That's one of the CIA's proprietary airlines. Evergreen Air.
They have it's like a laundry list of fronts and, company. I mean, it's amazing. Like, A to Z, it's like, it's unreal, Mike. There's so many intricate webs to this, to them, and they're unstoppable. I mean,
well, they're actually very stoppable. I mean, Congress and the president can basically say we're going to shut you down. Of course, the last president who tried to do that, wound up shot dead in Dealey Plaza. Yeah, I mean, the CIA has a lot of proprietary companies that they own outright, or they have associations with other companies. Remember, Brewster Jennings Associates was the one that Valerie Plame worked for, and when she got outed as a CIA asset, it blew the cover off of Brewster Jennings Associates, which was actually the CIA's main facility for tracking third world attempts to obtain nuclear weapons. And so when they went after Valerie Plame to discredit her husband over his discrediting of the Yellow Cake claim in Iraq, they literally destroyed, at least for a short while, the U.S. ability to find out just who was trading nuclear weapons around the world. And we know it's a problem because, of course, paperwork exists showing that Israel was trying to sell a nuclear weapon to the former government of South Africa.
Wasn't it Dick Cheney who outed her?
Yes, I think that's right.
Yeah, see, like these people, your usefulness is up to a certain point, and, they'll just discard you like you're just garbage. It's a joke, Mike. Like, how can anybody support? I mean, I'm not saying like the underlings of the CIA, they do their job, but you got those sections, the good old boy sections, like that sections of the team players per se that, I mean, like I said, when Trump come in, I mean, I feel sorry for the smaller group, but they should have brought in Ray McGovern. I know you talked about this for William Benny for the NSA. He can still do that.
Yes.
I mean, there's people there that know the system because you need somebody who knows the system. You just can't bring in Joe Schmo off the docks at the fishery, I mean, you got to have somebody who knows the inner workings.
See, unfortunately, those plum positions at the top of these agencies are usually given to, campaign supporters and campaign donors who may or may not know what they're doing with that job. And very often at the top levels of our government, decisions are made without really evaluating their potential consequences downstream. And the outing of Valerie Plame was a good example. They wanted to discredit her and discredit her husband to protect the lie that Saddam was building nuclear weapons. And apparently nobody even stopped to consider that it might actually damage Brewster Jennings and the U.S. ability to track third world nuclear weapons. It just didn't occur to them. I've pointed out many times over the last several years where decisions are being made and clearly nobody is really doing an analysis on the potential blowbacks or the downsides of any of this stuff. They just get an idea in their head and it sounds really good and they say, that's what we're going to do. It's policy. Let's move forward.
Mike, I want to switch gears to Trump.
Yes.
I know we talk about this. I call in about all the time about the tax plan. And I know people love Trump still. I mean, I voted for him. I'm a Democrat. I said that before. And, I like him still, but I don't like him because remember when he ran into debates, he said, basically dumb people pay taxes. He knows he has, he paid certain politicians off to do favors. He said that, and we know that. And, that's business as usual. But, with the Paradise Papers coming out and stuff like that, and, with the tax plan, it just aggravates me, Mike, how, these people, it just seems like they're always going to get a break and everybody else is going to get the shaft. I mean, it says like people who make over $600,000 is going to get 8% less paying taxes, but people who make less than that is 1.5%. But then you take away the deductions for, the local and state taxes. Most people are going to be paying more. I hate to tell you that. And, Trump's going to be saving $31 million here, another $71 million here. And why didn't they just do the $1.2 billion tax cut for the middle class and leave the corporate tax rate as it is? Because they have the paradise of, all those islands and Scotland and Ireland, the double hop, skip, whatever they call it. They have all these loopholes. They're not even stopping, Mike. We're getting the shaft again. I mean,
yeah, we are.
How many more times can people?
Well, again, every oppressive regime, every tyranny in history has made a point of destroying the middle class because it is from the middle class that opposition to oligarchy arises. And we're seeing it happen here. The Soviet Union lasted for as long as it did because they designed a system that simply didn't have a middle class to begin with. There was the vast proletariat, and then there were the elites. And they supposedly to pave the way for the classless society, they built the most powerful ruling class in all of history. They even outdid the Tsars toward the end there in terms of their absolute power. The poor are made to pay for everything, and the rich are always going to buy themselves special favors and loopholes because politicians as a class would sell their own mother for $1. And that is unfortunately a sad commentary on our current system. One of the reasons why the tax code is as huge and obfuscated as it is it represents an accumulation of decade after decade after decade of special favors given to certain industries, certain businesses in exchange for campaign donations. And most people can be forgiven for not having looked at the tax code. And it really is a mess, and it should be simplified, but then all the special favors and loopholes go away, and the money junkies are never going to allow that.
But you know what the scam, Mike, Sean Hannity, all those guys they have on about the tax plan on Fox News, you notice they keep saying it's about growth. So basically, oh yeah, you'll be paying more taxes, but you know what? It's about growth. It might help you, but if it don't, guess what? The corporate tax rate still stays at 20. 10 years later,
well,
your taxes are going to go up even more.
Wait a minute. You need to understand something about growth of the economy. Because when you have a private central bank that creates the public currency out of thin air and loans it into circulation, when they talk about growth, what they really mean is the growth in the total indebtedness of the nation, which is good for them and bad for us. They use the word growth because it sounds positive. But the reality is a growing economy means growing debt that must be serviced down the road somewhere.
Yeah, that's why I'm not an expert, and I do a lot of research, but I'm not like an economic expert. But I mean, the whole thing is, if the consumer, the consumption, those who consume the most should get the most tax cut because they go out and stimulate the economy by buying stuff. That creates jobs.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, and it is amazing that our financial planners and experts in Wall Street and Washington, D.C. don't understand that the reason the economy is grinding to a halt is because the vast majority of the American people, the consumers, don't have the money to pour back into the system, to go to the malls and buy stuff. We're looking at another disastrous Christmas season. We're seeing iconic retailers are starting to fall left and right. But the money junkies, because they are money junkies, because they are in the throes of a real psychological addiction, they cannot see anything beyond getting that next money fix. They really are very ill people.
Mike, having Goldman Sachs do your tax plan is having Count Dracula watch over the blood bank.
Or like having
Thanks,
the health insurance companies write the Affordable Care Act. So forth and so on. All right, we're going to go to Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
The U.S. corporate tax rate is one of the highest in the world, and there's trillions of dollars overseas that could be brought back home if that tax rate was lowered. I think it's at nearly 40% this year. So, a corporate tax rate and taxing people that actually work in that corporation are two totally different things. Because there are stockholders and whatnot, and they put up a certain amount of cash, and they expect a certain return to dividend. So
there's a little bit of a problem with that. There's a little bit of a problem with that. If the corporate tax rate is lowered to match the rest of the world, that is not an incentive for these corporations to go through the trouble and expense of bringing their operations back to the United States of America. And when you look at our deteriorated infrastructure that is needed to support industry and agriculture, when you look at the educational level of the average American worker, there really isn't much of anything to work with in terms of rebuilding the factories and getting us back on our feet again. So I'm afraid the cut in corporate tax rate is actually too little. It's more of a giveaway. And every time the corporations get a gift, they just put it in their own pocket. We have not seen a significant amount of investment activity on a large scale in this country that would allow us to get some of those 94 million Americans who've been out of work for months and years back onto the job.
Yeah, that is true, but you know, at the same time, I mean, you got to start somewhere. If the United States has, and I'm not saying that corporations do pay that 39%. There are a lot of loopholes, and you know, we know that.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the same thing applies up here in Canada. I think our corporate tax rate is 15%. I mean, we're no better off than the United States. A lot of jobs have been lost up here. You know, I saw it with my own eyes. I live in a city where the industry, like high-paying, good-paying manufacturing jobs, have, you know, almost disappeared. All that's left are, you know, technical service jobs in food plants and whatnot. You know, mill writing, which you know I am, and electricians and stuff like that. But you know, I mean, I don't think it would hurt. I don't think it could hurt any more. The people of the United States to have the corporate tax rate lowered. I mean, you never know.
I don't think it's going to help the American people.
I mean, Apple brought.
I don't think it's going to turn. I mean, there have been, you know, Trump has gotten some companies to say we're going to bring jobs back to the United States of America, but it's more symbolism. Because the number of jobs they're talking about is just, you know, minuscule compared to the number of unemployed Americans. What we really need in order to rebuild our industry is to, first of all, we got to get our infrastructure back together, and we have got to start coming up with new ideas for new products and industries that other countries can't yet make. Because the reason these corporations have gone to these other countries is because the U.S. just gave away the crown jewels of our technology. If you go back and you look at the tech boom of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, all of that came out of the Apollo missions to the moon and figuring out how to get to the moon. It was new materials, new structures, microchips, all of that stuff came out of that. And then because we had a managerial class that was not in love with the actual idea of manufacturing, thank you, Harvard Business School, they simply said, we'll license the technology to these other countries where they can make it a lot cheaper. When Seymour Cray was designing the last round of supercomputers before he passed away, he couldn't find a single American company who could fabricate the chips he needed. He had to go direct to Japan to get them.
Yeah, well, you know, and Japan, I mean, the only reason they got built up is because they stole the American technology and
they didn't
the stuff
steal
they were putting
it.
out when they first started manufacturing was garbage.
Al, they didn't steal it. It was licensed to them. It was shared with them. And
you know what? I'm not really saying stealing, though. You know what I mean? It's
well,
they basically, you know.
Well, once they have the technology, yeah, they're going to copy it off here. You need to go find yourself.
Oh, yeah.
You need to find a book called Airframe, and it's by Michael Crichton, and it's about the aviation industry, and it's about globalism. And the story basically involves this aircraft manufacturing company, and it's being taken over by these globalist hotshots who are trying to make deals with these other countries for airplanes. And part of the deal is they get to basically manufacture the wings for themselves. And, of course, that is good for the short term and the stock options and the rest of it, but that technology transfer means that in a few years, those countries are going to be able to make their own wing structures for their own aircraft. And so when you have invested huge amounts of money in developing a technological advantage over another country, you have to keep it close to your chest. And you have to keep those jobs that use that technology to make products in this country. The instant you start offshoring all of that, you've lost that technological advantage. You've thrown it away, basically, is what happened. And again,
your country is in decline.
Yeah, that's where, right. And it's been in decline for 30 years.
Could you put that up on your website, Mike?
Which part?
That book and that book and that author.
Well, it's Michael Crichton. I'm sure you've heard of him. He did Jurassic Park and the others. This is one of his lesser-known books. It's called simply Airframe. It'll never be made into a movie, I guarantee you. But, toward the end of his career, Michael Crichton, he had enough money. He wasn't really interested in getting any more. And his last series of books, he was trying to sound a warning about what he saw as dangerous directions in society. And Airframe was one of them, about globalism, State of Fear, about the global warming hoax. and it's really good stuff. And it's, you know, you can go down to
like Aaron Russo.
Yeah, absolutely. You reach a point in your life where you know you don't have a lot of life left, and you've got enough money to be comfortable. You're not a money addict, and you start using whatever skills and art that you have to try and get the message out there. George Carlin was another one toward the end of his career. He was going to say what he thought people needed to hear. He'd make it funny so people would listen, but he was out there saying what he thought people needed to hear. And he didn't care if anybody got upset about it. And that was one of the things that I think made him truly great.
Yeah, and it was an eye-opener, too.
Yes.
It's really an eye-opener, the stuff that came out of that guy's mouth, you know, in the last decade and a half that he was alive.
Yes.
Thanks a lot for your time, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We do have another caller waiting on the line, but we're about ready to take a commercial break, so I'm going to put that on hold until we come back from these words from our sponsors. And then we're going to get back to the news about the war zones. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take a phone call from Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I was listening to your conversation with Dustin. I actually have two topics, but the more important one is what you guys started talking about, and that's how extensive the CIA and the intelligence community and how nobody knows exactly just how damn big they are. I mean, their budget is black. It's classified. And then only a few congressmen and senators have an idea of what their published classified for them is. And then you add on the drug trade, the drug smuggling, the arms trade, the arms smuggling, the front businesses they've set up, like you were saying, Brewster Jennings and others, and media outlets like that they're wholly owned, and blackmail and shakedown because they've got surveillance and all that stuff that they can shake people down. Then they've got murder for hire. Believe me, that happens as well.
Yes.
Then you add in the fact that they outsource a whole lot of this stuff to contractors, and it's pervasive.
Well,
it's everywhere. It's like a huge.
The contractors are to maintain deniability, and they can say, "Oh no, we didn't know about any of that stuff going on." And you're right. The CIA does conduct a lot of off-the-books missions or projects, if you will, that Congress has no idea about. Congress had no idea about Operation Screw a Worm out of Arkansas in the 1980s because it was illegal under the Boland Amendment and the Logan Act, and that's why the CIA was funding it all with cocaine smuggled into this country. In a lot of ways, they act like the mafia, and apparently throughout much of our history, the CIA and the mafia have actually worked together on certain projects. You had Jack Ruby, for example, was not only CIA, he was a mafia paymaster. So they think of it as the mafia wrapped in a flag, and that's probably a pretty accurate summation of the CIA.
And I know you know that Ruby worked for the Un-American Activities thing with Nixon, but he also was an arms smuggler to Israel.
Yes.
For the War of Independence. But the other thing I wanted to talk to, which is related to that, was the UN article on Rahm Emanuel and Amman Imran.
Yes, I saw that.
And how he helped spring Amman Imran from Pakistan. And wanted to point out a couple of things. For years it's been pretty much a given, honestly, by intelligence guys, that Rahm Emanuel, who, by the way, during the Gulf War, when we were at war, the Persian Gulf War, Desert Storm, he went over to Israel and put on an Israeli uniform.
Yes.
His father was an Israeli guy for the Irgun or something like that, and a terrorist for the Irgun. But
well,
anyway,
he
is an Israeli spy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, he is suspected of being MEGA, which was Israel's most highly placed spy in the Clinton White House. And that may be why Imran Awan was, as returned for getting out of Pakistan, spying on all the House members' computers, and which means that information went to Israel. All right, we got to take a break for station identification. Thank you for the call, Peter. We'll be right back. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call right now. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. All these sexual allegations and all this sexual scandal and everything, a part of me wants to say, this is nothing more than a diversion away from the narcocracy and Uranium One and Dossier Gate and all this other crap. How can we keep the picture and the focus on the narcocracy and on Uranium One and not let the mainstream and not let that get away from, the forefront of everybody's mind?
By talking to your friends and family, by emailing people and saying, don't be distracted by this, because the fact of the matter is, again, Congress actually released a list of all the sexual harassment and assaults and all the money they've been paying for like the last 20 years. So this stuff is going on all the time. Only when it becomes useful as a political weapon does it make its way into the corporate media. And you're right, we're being conditized with this. But the corporate media is just going to follow their instructions to keep trying and distract the American people with these tawdry little sex scandals. But it's up to us. It's up to the Rivero's Rangers to keep these topics alive on social media, our mailing lists, and just talking with ordinary people every day and just say, behind all of this, things are being hidden from you. They're trying to distract you with sex so you're not paying attention to things like the Uranium One sale. The fact that last year's primary definitely was rigged against Bernie Sanders, and this dossier for Donald Trump was paid for by the Clinton campaign, was never verified. They didn't even try to verify it before they leaked it on out to the media.
Yeah, and I don't know if you had seen yesterday with Hillary, maybe it wasn't yesterday, but Hillary and the mainstream media was saying, oh, if you launch an investigation into Hillary, this is authoritarian. This is a dictatorship. Well, didn't they launch an investigation into Trump over some messed up allegations that not even, it's like, wait a minute, what planet are you on?
Well, Hillary is definitely hitting the hysterics button here to make comments like that, along with that one to Mother Jones about if I'm charged, terrible things will happen. But it's clear to me that she's feeling the pressure. And she's starting to realize that maybe for the first time in the long history of the Clintons, they're not going to be able to get away with this stuff. And all it's going to take is one crack in the facade, and it's all going to come spilling on out. All the way back to Vince Foster.
You said it before. Yep, you said it before. She goes down, she's going to drag people down with her.
Yep.
Let it so be. Let her
agree.
Spill the guts.
I agree. Absolutely agree.
Well, you have a great and wonderful day. That was just my question and my comment, and I hope the more it gets, every day goes by, the more bizarre it gets.
Isn't it?
Al Franken calling in an ethical review on himself. Like, really?
He didn't really.
That's all I gotta say.
He didn't really call for it. He just said he was perfectly happy that they were going to do that. But again, the Senate Ethics Committee is where scandals go to be buried and never seen again. All right. Well, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Getting on back here to the war zones. Obviously, things in Saudi Arabia are moving forward rapidly, and the thing is that Saudi Arabia is dealing with some issues. They're dealing with an economy that got destroyed by that oil price war with Russia. Saudi Arabia is trying to deal with the reality that they may be running out of easily reachable oil to sell. And so there's sort of a finite timeline of the wealth continuing to pour on in. So it looks like Saudi Arabia is trying to position itself as a regional power, and they could ignite a region-wide conflict in the process. Now, a lot of people are scratching their head about why Israel and Saudi Arabia are working together, and a lot of people have been at pains to remind me that the Saudi royal family actually has links back to Israel. But what's really going on here is Saudi Arabia's got huge amounts of money, or they had huge amounts of money, and they know how to use it. But their military has never been all that effective. I mean, if you look at how long they've been stuck in Yemen and not able to make any progress other than inflicting humanitarian harm on the civil population, they need a powerful, well-trained military, and that may be why Crown Prince bin Salman is making overtures to partner with Israel. Because Saudi Arabia would like to have a war against Lebanon, but they want Israel's military to do it for them. So that's kind of what's going on over there. Strange alliances, as it were. Speaking of Lebanon, Lebanon is reporting that they are now dealing with a lot of pressure and intimidation efforts to get them to cancel the gas deal they've made with Russia. And basically trying to force Lebanon to give up this joint gas project with Russia. And it says there's this anti-Lebanon, anti-Russia campaign underway. And, of course, the oil and gas is a big issue behind all these wars. The U.S. wants all control of the oil and gas, or at least what currency it's sold for. And if Lebanon is going to be developing oil and gas with Russia, you can bet that that oil and gas is going to be sold for either Lebanon's own native currency or for the Russian ruble. And remember, it's having all of the world's resource-rich areas shackled to the dollar that is the penultimate agenda behind all this warmongering. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Iraq forces have liberated the last ISIS-held town, Rawa, near the Syrian border. So ISIS really is pretty much done and gone, except for all those ISIS officers and fighters that were evacuated from Syria by the United States. We don't know where they're being sent to, but I don't think they're being given retirement plans or anything like that. I think probably a lot of them are going to show up in the next countries that the U.S. wants to invade. Remember, they dropped some of them into the Philippines, and the Philippine military got rid of them, possibly with the help of China. We know they're now screaming that ISIS is showing up in Afghanistan to justify the escalation of troops and support into there. But it's becoming a recognizable pattern. Any country the United States wants to invade, they drop ISIS in there first and say, oh, ISIS, war on terror, we can come on in and bomb your country. The State Department has now issued a new assessment on Russia, calling it a threat from the Baltic to the Black Sea. And it's just more of this war propaganda. And apparently they're concerned that Russia has shown the ability to conduct and prepare large-scale exercises, such as the recent West 2017 exercises. And yeah, it is demonstrating a capability to deploy and coordinate large numbers of forces and to do so efficiently. But again, Russia is not the aggressor here. I keep hitting this point over and over again. You don't see Russian weapons on the northern side of our border with Canada or the southern side of our border with Mexico. You don't see Russian aircraft carriers sailing around in the Gulf of Mexico or off the coast of California. The last time there were Russian warships sailing off the coast of America was when Russia sided with the Union against the Confederacy and kept Europe from attacking the United States on behalf of the Confederacy. A little bit of history some of you may not have known here. Now, you know, there's this big NATO drill that they're getting ready to do here. And all of a sudden, Turkey pulled out of it because apparently looking at the maps for the war games, Erdogan's name was used on the enemy chart. And I can understand why Erdogan might be just a little upset over that, so they have now pulled on out. And that puts the possibility of Turkey being a part of NATO very much in doubt. Over in Korea, despite all the talk about our wonderful THAAD system and Patriot and everything else that's going on, the reality is that experts in military hardware are saying it's actually going to be very difficult to intercept and down North Korean missiles. And so the U.S. is embarking on a new program. They got an emergency funding request to Congress, trying to find new ways to bring down these missiles like cyber weapons and armed drones. Now, the problem with the cyber weapons is unless you're able to hack into the missile software at its point of manufacture, it's not like these missiles are on the internet. They don't have communication with the outside when they're being used for their primary purpose. During tests, yeah, there are radio links, telemetry, all kinds of things. Some missiles, some advanced missiles, do have radio links. They can be retargeted in the middle of a flight. I think some of the more advanced standards have that capacity. In case one missile gets a target and they decide, well, we've got an extra missile, let's send it over here. But for the most part, I don't think North Korea's missiles are going to have any kind of a radio or link that can be hacked into while it's in flight. Trump is apparently talking about adding North Korea to the list of state sponsors of terror next week, and that list has really become a joke because there are so many nations that are on that list that haven't actually been caught engaging in acts of terror. But apparently this is a move to try and outrage North Korea and try and goad them into doing something. But right now, Kim Jong-un is playing it very, very cool. He has not tested any more nuclear weapons. He has not tested any more long-range missiles. He's just sitting still and waiting for the U.S. to burn itself out on the rhetoric. Now, getting on down to Africa, apparently the U.S. now has significantly more troops in Somalia. They've got some 500 troops on the ground. They're denying there's a buildup of forces in the African country. Last time we were in Somalia, didn't really work all that well, if you've ever seen the movie Black Hawk Down. And finally, down in Argentina, apparently one of their military submarines is missing at sea in the South Atlantic. Apparently it last radioed its position 2 days ago, and so now they've launched a massive search for it. They're hoping it's simply a communication problem. And I am not hopeful, because submarines have more than one radio, even the Argentine submarines. And sometimes they simply vanish after a communication report. That's what happened with the USS Scorpion. When it was coming across the Atlantic, it filed a location report, was never heard from again. And everybody was standing at the docks in the U.S. waiting for the sub to come on in, and it just never came on in. Finally, they were able to locate it, and Bob Ballard actually surveyed the wreckage of the Scorpion and the Thresher as part of the clandestine component of his mission to find the Titanic. A lot of people don't know this, but Ballard was in the Navy, and he was reactivated, and they used the search for the Titanic as a cover story for the missions to go on out and look for the Scorpion and the Thresher and put to rest these hysterical claims that Russia had sunk both of these submarines. In the case of the Scorpion, it was pretty much figured out that there was a defective torpedo battery that could actually activate while the torpedo was still in the submarine, and it would overheat because it didn't have the ocean water flowing by it to cool it, and could lead to a cook-off of the warhead. And in the case of the Thresher, they tried to save a little bit of money by brazing some of the pipe joints instead of outright welds. And one of the brazed joints cut loose, and it sprayed water all over the two electric control panels, which were imprudently located side by side. And so that's what happened to that one. And Ballard sort of figured all of that out. And I actually lost a cousin on the Thresher. So kind of a sensitive issue. And I hope they find these submariners. And I got to tell you, I have a lot of respect for submariners. For anybody who's going to lock themselves in that metal tube, and you would never, ever get me in one of those. I mean, I've been on the tour submarines off the coast here to go down and look at the shipwrecks and everything. But a combat submarine, no, that would not be my idea of fun. So let's talk about the economic news here. And as you know, we're less than a week away from Thanksgiving. There's going to be the Thanksgiving holiday and Black Friday and the start of the holiday shopping season. And actually, Claire and I, we already got most of ours done. Not that we had much of a budget, but we had to buy the stuff for the children at the local Toys R Us because we don't know when they're going to close. And they're already starting to run out of stuff because a lot of their suppliers are not sending any more inventory out of concern that they're not going to get paid. So we had to get that out of the way. But there's a very disturbing article out of CNBC on how an alarming number of American shoppers are still paying off the debts from last Christmas. You go on, you know, if you're a good Christian and you're a good holiday spirit and you love your family, you'll max out the plastic and buy those Hickory Farms boxes of preservative-loaded cheese and meat or whatever it is you're going to be doing this year. And that's really kind of a terrible way to be doing that. I mean, you can get in a situation where you're going to be paying off the debt on something that you bought long after the item that you bought has burned out, worn out, and been thrown away. And that really isn't the way to go. Stick to cash, have a budget. 27% of people surveyed in this study admit they don't have a budget. They just grab all the money and grab all the plastic, and they go to the malls and they get a rush just, for once in the year being able to just buy whatever you get an impulse to buy. And it is a rush, I'll admit that. But you got to be very, very careful, because Christmas, as it's handled in this country, in fact, all the holidays, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, it's just marketing and marketing and marketing. And I learned that many, many years ago when I was working on a film project in Munich, Germany, and I got to experience Christmas at the Marienplatz. And I'm sure today, with all the refugees and everything that's gone on in, that wonderful romantic feeling may not be there anymore. But it really felt like I had always thought Christmas was supposed to be, based on what I read in books, as opposed to this, it's Christmas time, buy, 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 buy. Remember Tom Lehrer's Christmas Carol? You ought to hunt that one down. It's on YouTube. Getting on back to Toys R Us, even though they are in bankruptcy, Toys R Us has asked the bankruptcy court for permission to pay $16 million in bonuses to its top executives, assuming that they can hit some financial targets during the upcoming holiday shopping season. So they're literally betting that they're going to make a bunch of money over Christmas, and they probably will get a surge. The problem is too many retailers literally bet their entire year on that holiday shopping season. They expect to make 1/3 of their money in that last month of the year. And it's been falling short for the last several years now, because people just don't have a lot of money. And more people very wisely and prudently don't want to go to those credit cards with the high interest rates. So we'll see what happens there. Now, article over an Investment Watch blog, Fed admits negative interest rates must be implemented by all central banks to prevent collapse. In other words, they're going to pay you to borrow the money. And I imagine that's going to be very attractive for people on Wall Street so that they can play with the stock market some more. But I think for ordinary people like you and I, we don't want to borrow money. We're not sure we can pay it back. And that's the difference between Wall Street, Washington, D.C.'s axis of greed, and the rest of us. Washington will borrow money like crazy, so will Wall Street. Ordinary people, we don't want to borrow any more money. If we're not sure we can pay it back, we don't want to borrow. And that really is a better way to think about it. Now, Volkswagen has announced they're going to make a big push into electric cars. They're going to invest around $40 billion with a B over the next 5 years to develop new electric vehicles, self-driving cars, and an Uber-like mobility app services. And they're even talking about robot taxi services. So they're making a big push to develop some new technologies that are going to be out there. And it will be interesting to see if it works and if they can make it work. It may help the revolution. Remember, there have been some breakthroughs now in the lithium batteries used to power electric cars where they won't explode on you, and they're much, much, much faster to charge. And that was the last major roadblock to the electric car, was the charging time. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And getting on over to Europe and the refugee crisis, according to the World Economic Forum Global Agenda Council on Migration, according to the chairman, Dr. Khalid Koser, MBE, mass Muslim migration makes Europe more secure. And I don't know what drugs he's on, because Europe is not more secure. There's been skyrocketing rates of rape, gang violence, crime in general. It's not secure at all. This guy saying so won't make it so. Another place that the refugee policy has backfired is Germany, because their homeless population is exploding. And they basically had a one-third growth of people living rough in the last 2 years. Something like today, on 2017, something like 65, 70,000 people living on the German streets. When I was in Germany, you just didn't see that. One of the big problems that's happening all across Europe and even here in America is this huge influx of the refugees is causing a housing shortage, which is driving up rents and housing prices. Now, there was a roundup of the MS-13 gang members here in the United States. And MS-13, though, these are bad hombres. They're running drugs. They have a big thing for tattoos all over their bodies like the Yakuza did. And just do a web search on MS-13 and you'll see what these people are like. Apparently, 1/3 of all of these arrested MS-13 gangsters were invited into the United States by President Barack Obama's unaccompanied alien children policy. And remember, even when it was going on, they were saying, these aren't children. You know, these are adult men coming into this program, and they're gang members. Maybe they're working with the CIA to sell the CIA's cocaine and heroin on the streets. Now, apparently, in Great Britain, new migrants have made up 90% of new households over the past decade. That's how much they're pouring on in. Now, over in France, Macron is blaming the rise of Islamic radicalism because the French Republic has resigned. And he's basically saying that it's really the fault of France that this is happening. That if France was being French, the Muslims would come on in and there wouldn't be any problems. They're really starting to grasp at straws, trying to negate the negative impact of this open borders policy. Now, over in Great Britain, Theresa May, who has now backed off her claims that Russia caused Brexit and so forth and so on, is now asking the EU to respond positively to her current proposals for the Brexit. And meanwhile, much of her opposition is saying there shouldn't be a deal. There shouldn't be a divorce payment. There's nothing about that in the EU Charter. Let's just leave. Meanwhile, Ireland is saying that they will block progress on the Brexit negotiations with the EU unless Great Britain gives a formal written guarantee that there will be no hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So that's another wild card factor out there as well. Story coming on out from the Truth News. EU elite planning to blame the coming financial crisis on Brexit. We didn't mismanage, the money. It's not the fault of the private central bank. It's Brexit. Brexit has caused the global crash. It's all their fault, those people who voted for Brexit. Go hate them. Don't hate us. Hate them. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Rather interesting little story that appeared in the Daily Sheeple, where apparently over in Sweden there's a social media campaign pressuring Sweden to adopt a Turkish-style flag due to Islam's rapid growth in the country. And there's a petition out there asking Sweden's prime minister to do away with the current offensive flag. Now, I got an email from somebody who says that actually take the story with a grain of salt. It's not getting that much support over there. But again, it underscores that the current open borders migrants do not want to assimilate into their new homes, which has normally been the pattern for much of history. When you go to another country, you learn their language, you learn their laws, you learn their customs. in your own home, you can be what you were in your old country, use your old language. Teddy Roosevelt said it perfectly. If you want to come to the United States of America, you're welcome. But understand, this is the United States of America. We have a language here, English. We have laws that must be obeyed. All right, let's take a phone call. Clay in Alabama, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, about Judge Moore.
Yes?
He may not be an angel, but I predict he's going to win by shocking landslide.
Yeah.
In large part because the Republican Party has turned against him. They've cut off their financing, and they're even threatening not to let him be seated if he wins.
And
so I think the Republicans have shot themselves in the foot more than they've hurt Roy Moore.
I would tend to agree because, especially with this yearbook signature now discredited, and as I said before, if you have real evidence that Moore did these things 30 years ago, you don't dare put something faked in there, because if it's discovered, it will discredit everything else. So if we've got fakery and fraud here with this yearbook signature, then it means basically everything that was being hurled at Moore was a fraud. And remember, they tried exactly the same thing with Donald Trump, and it didn't work. And I think the people of Alabama are probably recognizing that this is a classic political smear job, precisely because it was used against Donald Trump. And I think you're probably right. Unless there's massive election fraud, I think Moore is going to win. And if the Senate refuses to seat him, you're right. The GOP is shooting itself in the foot. And that means a Democratic Congress next year.
Well, let's hope not. But I think this whole deal, the whole government is putting smut on its own face more than is the people they're attacking. I think a mistake they're making is I think every average American is just stupid, or they wouldn't be an average American. That they'd be in government or be a billionaire or something. I think they've just misjudged big time.
I think they really have, and again, it's because so many of them have been playing the game this way for all their lives, and they don't understand the environment has changed around them. The general population are skeptical. They don't trust politicians as a class now. And people have a natural sympathy for somebody that they see is definitely being a victim of nefarious actions. And Moore is an outside. And what's really amazing is to see all these Republicans with the balance between GOP and Democrats in the Senate so close, they're willing to give away a Senate seat to a Democrat just to not have Judge Roy Moore in the chamber. And you have to wonder what's going on. What engendered that kind of hate? Is this simply Mitch McConnell's revenge? Even McCain is out there. And the net result is they're reducing their own power in the Senate.
Well, they're exposing themselves for what they are.
Yes.
And it's not just Republicans. It's not just Democrats. That whole crowd up there, they're a little group. They feel like anybody outside their circle is insignificant and stupid. Because if they weren't stupid, they'd be inside their circle. So I think.
Well, I think it has more to do with the corruption. If you're willing to be corrupt, you're inside our club. If you have these antiquated ideas of morality and ethics, we don't want you around here because you're going to spoil the party. I mean, the moral and the immoral are mutually exclusive societies. Neither one tolerates the presence of the other, and that means once a government starts to go corrupt, it's very quickly going to go all the way corrupt.
Well, it seems to me, if you study history a little bit, in the end, eventually, all governments fail because of corruption.
Yes.
Oftentimes, sometimes they get overrun by a more powerful enemy, which is more powerful because their government is so corrupt. I mean,
we saw that with Rome.
It can't even defend the country anymore.
We saw it with Rome. We saw it with the former Soviet Union.
I think we're close to that. I sure do. Thank you for taking my call.
You got it. And get out there and vote for Roy Moore on Election Day. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Lenny in Los Angeles. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Mike, I would like to speak to what you said before the caller from Alabama called in about the Swedes and the pushing of an Islamic flag in the country of Sweden. And you said that it underscores, the thinking of some people when they enter other people's country. I beg to differ. It underscores the non-thinking of the Swedes and the fact that it is their country and it just may be worth fighting for. Okay? And also pertaining to as far as the people who are pushing the so-called Islamic flag and making the Swedes feel guilty about it, I guarantee you they're not Islamic at all. I guarantee you it's that band of people who are looking to miscegenate Europe. And they're not Islamic. There's the so-called Muslims are nothing but the scapegoat of these people's doing.
Well, again, we did get a reader's email saying that the reality is that this is not going to go anywhere, that the Swedish people are not sympathetic to this idea at all. But again, we're seeing all these indications of an agenda to try and erase our sense of national identity or regional cultural history, and look at that situation that happened over in Poland, where they had 60,000 people marched in a nationalism rally. And it was being denounced all over the world. Oh, what do you mean nationalism? Oh, you shouldn't be thinking that way at all. We had that story a few days ago where John McCain was addressing the cadets at one of the military academies, and he's literally up there saying, "Don't make America great. Don't put America first. You've got to start thinking about how we're going to merge with Europe and everything." And so they're pushing this whole globalist New World Order idea. And the people are starting to push on back because they look at what's happened in the European Union and realize that it is a raw deal, that it means a lowered standard of living, less security at home, and along with all this political correctness that you can't say or do anything that might offend any of the dozen or so new ethnic groups that are now in your neighborhood.
Yeah, and like I said, the reason these ethnic groups are stuck there, the same reason the blacks, whites, Mexican, Asian here in America are being put at each other's throats. The band of thieves know who they are. They've stolen everything and can't steal no more, and they're afraid that the people are going to come after them. The Swedes wouldn't be any different. Okay, so what I'm saying is that if you look at the lowest form of animal, you cannot use one form of animal or mammal to miscegenate another one. They have sense enough to know this. The only ones who can be convinced of this is the so-called human being.
Well, yeah, you're right, and again, it's divide and conquer. The reason our government is trying to turn blacks against white. Same reason back in the 1960s, to prevent us from uniting against the real threat to our way of life, which is that federal government.
Right. Ryan, let me just say this. I know how it's going to come out and it's going to offend some people, but I'm with the polls all the way.
Yes, me too.
Thank you very much.
Me too. I absolutely agree with you. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, turning to Germany, Angela Merkel has missed her own deadline to form a coalition government. It's been 2 months since Germany's election. They can't form a government, and now they're looking at a new election. And Angela Merkel may be on her way out because even though her party won the election, it was by a slim margin. And during the weeks leading up to the election, Angela Merkel appeared to be softening her position on the open borders and saying, well, maybe there needs to be controls and maybe we need to rethink this. And then, of course, after she won the election, she went right back to the hard line. The borders will stay open. Get used to the refugees. They're good for you. They're good for our economy. Just a few thousand raped girls is no reason to reverse policy on this thing. So I think if there is a new election, she's going to do even worse, and she might find herself out the door, because that issue of the open borders is why she can't form a coalition. The other two parties that she is dealing with primarily are all saying it's time to close the borders and get this situation under control. Now, Spain has issued European arrest warrants for the Catalan independence leaders. Some of them are already arrested and in jail, which has triggered massive protests across Catalonia. And it doesn't look like that's really settling down too much. Now, as you know, the World Anti-Doping Agency has just declared by fiat that Russia remains non-compliant with its code. Russia is saying that the earlier claims of doping that kicked Russian athletes out of some of the events of the last Olympics and completely out of the Paralympics were fraudulent, and they've even pointed the finger of blame at the CIA. But the World Anti-Doping Agency is saying Russia is non-compliant, which raises the possibility that Russia will be banned from the upcoming Winter Olympics in South Korea. And Russian TV is basically saying that if Russia is discriminated against in this way, they're not going to carry the Olympics at all inside Russia on any of the Russian TV. Let's take a phone call. Francis in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you both.
Aloha.
Nick Barnall. I tell you what, I have to agree with an earlier call you had about the aspect of regarding, Roy Moore and the whole distract scenario and so on ad nauseum, because it just sounds so typical if you really think about it.
Okay.
So distract from one hand with another hand as to what's really going on. Now, I have a quick question for you as to your train of thought of how you would deal with this. You find out, now this is just an example for you.
Okay.
In light of what's been going on across the U.S. with various shootings of this and shootings of that and, the whole 9 yards, as it were, ad nauseum, and you go to a nearby theater, and they decide they want to check out your bags and all that stuff because, we want to make sure that there's enough space for folks and all that, as well as we want to make sure for your security and all that you have nothing funky in your bags besides, like, say, your knitting needles or something, or yarn you were playing with besides your handbag. And you've never had to experience that before. And so you call up the management and inquire about what the story is with that. Being that when you go into the theater, there's no issue with space and all that since it's tucked between your feet before the viewing is done. Now, there's two possible options. You can either go there and allow them to go and possibly go through and say, okay, we're going to make sure that's yarn you got, we're going to make sure that's the needles you got, we're going to make sure that what you say is in your knitting bag is what you've really got in there. Or, and basically go through that just to go to see a film, which is totally absurd, in light of all this other garbage that's been going on that they're using as an excuse. Or, secondly, basically boycott the bloody theater, and whoever happens to ask where you saw the film, tell them, well, I would have seen it at this theater, but since they treat you like a criminal and want to search whatever you have with you because they're afraid you're going to do something stupid or whatever, or silly, or who knows what, even though you're in it by... you're past a certain age range.
Francis, I want to cut you off because we're coming up on a commercial break. First of all, you can actually kill people with a knitting needle, so that may have not been the best example. But you're right. I would do the boycott. And the last time Claire and I were in Southern California, we decided we were going to go visit Disneyland because we hadn't been there for a decade. And we got there, and all the new post-9/11 security was there with the metal detectors and everything, which I was okay with. But, there was this huge, long line of people going past this table, and the security people were just going through all the purses and camera bags and everything. And I turned to Claire and I said, I'm not going to do this. And I'm not carrying anything other than a camera, but, going through this security check is going to completely destroy, my happy feeling about being at Disneyland. And we literally turned around and we walked. We never went into the park that day. We never bought our tickets and probably will never go back there again as long as that kind of attitude is there. And it's not because I'm a criminal or a terrorist. It's because I'm a private person, and I do not want to be treated like a criminal when I am not, in fact, a criminal.
You're nailing it.
Yeah.
You're nailing it. I mean, as I explained to the theater management, I told them, I said, listen, at my age, I mean, come on. You're talking about throwing common sense out the bloody window over some, shall we say, falsely set up scenarios where apparently some people did get hurt or whatever, or lost their life, whatever the case might be, and so forth. But, I mean, you're talking about in a neighborhood where everybody just about knows everybody else. How do you have a situation like that carry over? You don't. I mean, this is purely ridiculous. So the only thing I'm resolved to is basically boycotting the theater and just, if someone asked me, like I said before, say, no, I wouldn't go there because, well, quite frankly, they're unfriendly to knitters.
Well,
that's all there is to it. You want to knit, go somewhere else.
Basically, Claire and I, we don't go to theaters anymore for a variety of reasons. We're willing to wait the extra couple of months until the movies come on cable, because then we're comfortable in our own home. Certainly the food that we have here is a lot healthier for us than what they sell at those theater snack bars. But, you know, we've grown out of that age where we have to see the movie as soon as it comes on out. In fact, we're perfectly willing to let other people see the movie and then say, boy, this one really is terrible, and then we don't waste our time on it. Okay? We got to take a break for commercials. Francis, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Coming up on the top of the hour in Washington State, there is a U.S. Navy pilot, F-18 pilot, who's in a lot of trouble because apparently after taking off from Whidbey Island Air Station yesterday, he basically used the contrail from his jet to draw a male anatomical member in the skies high over Washington State. So, again, is this who you want to go into combat with? On a more serious situation, as you know, Wolfgang Halbig is being sued by a reported father of one of the Sandy Hook students, and is basically trying to drive Halbig out of business and shut him up and silence him. But so far, it looks like the judge is ruling more or less in favor of Halbig. And apparently Posner wanted to punish Halbig with a hold in contempt for recording a previous court hearing, which, by the way, is perfectly legal under the laws of the state of Florida. And the plaintiff was trying to sue Halbig over posting the plaintiff's already public information, which is not a crime. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Sherry in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thank you. The 1%, I think they know that no one can afford their products anymore. I don't think the money junkies whose brains have been so distorted, I don't think they need an independent buying public to be rich. And their whole idea is to create addicts and dependents. Addicts through drugs, dependents through debt, because their goal, which is not going to work, by the way, is that 1%, they want to get rich on the back of a working class whose wages are paying for all the stuff they want us to buy, all the designated houses and automobiles, is all going to come out of their wages. In other words, we're going to be a nation that is what they would like us to be. These corporations will narrow our choices.
There's a problem. There's a problem. Whether it's people not having enough money to buy goods at shopping malls, or people not having enough money to pay their debts, or people not having enough money even to be drug addicts. All of these plans fall apart unless the working and middle-class people have got decent jobs that pay decent wages and salaries so that they've got the money to buy whatever it is the money junkies want to sell us. If we can't buy anything, whether it's illegal drugs or a flat panel TV set, then the money junkies don't have any more money coming on in, and that's their problem. Their mental illness is they cannot. Their mental illness, they can't appreciate the money they already have. They only get that cocaine-like thrill when another big chunk comes on in, and that's the psychology of what's going on, and why these money junkies are as dangerous to society as they are.
But Mike, they just want to be, they don't want us to be the owners of businesses. They want us just to be employees.
They want to.
But it's not going to work.
They want to bring back. They want to bring back.
They just want us to be employees. They'll give us the jobs.
Okay,
and the houses.
No, they won't.
We pay out of our wages.
No, if they had the jobs to give us, they would have given them to us by now. And
this is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from 2X Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.